How's it going, guys? Welcome to week 13 of METC 107. So just a few things I want to show you this week and a couple reminders as we kind of get started here. So we're obviously in week 13 now. We're going to be talking about exploded assemblies today. I'm going to show you guys how to make an exploded assembly file and how you take that and put it onto a drawing page. So before we get into that, just a quick reminder that your final project is now ongoing. We talked about the introduction to that last week. So make sure you're continuing to work on your final project where you guys are going to reverse engineer something. And just a reminder, if you need to see any of the details or information or have questions about what to do on the final project, make sure you watch this video that I posted that talks about all the requirements for the final project, what you need to do, things you need to know, and what you need to turn in when you're done. So just a reminder for you as you kind of work through that and what you want to know for the final project. So if you'll notice in our week 13 information today, we're going to talk about assembly animations and exploded assemblies and presentation files, but there's not a new homework assignment. If you click on week 13 homework assignment instructions, it basically tells you to continue working on your final project. Now, before you close this video and think, he's just going to talk about some more stuff today that really doesn't matter because I just got to work on this project and there's no homework, so I'm going to skip the week 13 lecture. What I'm going to show you today in the video, you really need to know to finish your project, because one of the things that you have to create for your final project is a assembly drawing that shows an exploded assembly view. So I'm going to show you the process today pretty quickly here of how do you take a finished assembly model and explode it apart for like a bill of materials and a parts list drawing into an exploded view. So what we're going to work on today is going to be kind of that last thing you need to know to successfully complete your final project when you get done. So let's jump back to week 13. Now that we've kind of reminded ourselves of the final project and talked a little bit about what we're going to do today, we're going to look at week 13, and I have in the lecture notes link in the module a zip folder that you're going to want to download. So if you download that zip folder, you'll need to extract it before you can do any of this. So download it. You'll notice it has the icon on there that looks like a zipper. You're going to right click and go to extract all and hit extract. And remember that uncompresses or unzips that folder. So now you can see I have two versions. I have the zipped compressed version and the uncompressed version down here. So I'm going to delete the compressed one because I really don't need it at this point. And I'm going to go in and open up our assembly file. So in here you'll see a couple of things. I've got 5 or 6 part files in here, an assembly file, a drawing page, and then a presentation file. So I'm going to go ahead and show you what we're trying to do at the end here, or what we're kind of going for, and then I'll show you how do you create it. So I want you to see what we're kind of shooting for at the end here. I'm also going to open up the drawing file so you can kind of see that. And it's mad about a file reference here, so let me show it where this file is. Yeah, we may have an issue here. Okay, we'll just skip for now. It's looking for like some kind of imported part that I put in here, but that's not critical to what we're doing, so you can hit skip on that. We'll fix it along the way here probably. Alright, so a couple things here. So what you see here, this is our assembly drawing, and we're going to kind of take this and add to it. But ultimately what we're wanting to create here is the drawing you see here with a bill of materials or a parts list. So this is kind of our finished goal for today, is we want to see if we can create this thing. Now the trick to doing any of this is you got to know how to make a drawing file, which hopefully you guys do at this point. So can you make an IDW with a a title block template like you see here? And can you make an assembly file? Because you can't make the exploded assembly view like this if you don't know how to constrain the pieces together into an assembly. So before you can do any of this, you got to know how to model parts, you got to know how to make drawing pages, and you've got to know how to make assembly files. If you can do those 3 things, now you're ready to look at the idea of making these exploded views or animations. Okay, so this ultimately is kind of what we're going towards, and this is the file type we're going to use. So this is a finished one. I put that in there just for reference for you guys, but we're going to start from scratch with the assembly file. So ultimately what you're going to see when we get done is we've got an exploded view like this that we can take then and put onto the drawing page. So we've really got 2 different things on the drawing page here. This is generated from our assembly file. If you look over here in my browser, you can see this view is my IAM, or my traditional assembly model. This one is created from my presentation file, which has the file extension of .ipn on there. So two different models that you're actually looking at here that they go together on one drawing page typically. So let's go ahead and close these out, and I'm going to show you how do we make this stuff from scratch and how do we finish the parts that aren't really perfect on here. Okay, so let's close these down. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to New, and we're working in inches, so I'm going to stay in the English folder, and I'm going to make a presentation file, which is that .ipn file extension. So this is our fourth and final file type for the semester. So I'm going to choose an inch IPN file, hit create, and now it's looking okay, and it says I need an assembly file. We're going to take and make an animation or an exploded view. What assembly am I starting with? So like we said, you can't do anything with these presentation files until you have that assembly model created. So the assembly process is always first, then you come and make the exploded view. So I'm going to go into my downloads folder, and I'm going to show Inventor where my assembly file for this tow hitch is. So I'm going to choose that and hit open. And it's still mad about this piece. For now, let's just skip it. I think that's probably the lock nut that's on the bottom. So we'll just ignore that for right now. We can go back and patch it up later. So here is our exploded view, or what's going to become our exploded view. So the trick on this is you want to take these pieces and basically pull them apart in the order that they would be assembled. So I want to show you guys an example of, some exploded views maybe. Because I think it's important to see some different types of them. So you see these a lot like in assembly instructions, or also like in parts diagrams. It's pretty common. So, for instance, like on this. So this is obviously for, some kind of car parts, for like a transmission or a transfer case. So this is an exploded view, and you can see they've got these what are called trail lines that show how these pieces stack up and go together. So these exploded assembly views are great for like two different things. One is it shows you all the pieces and where they go, and you can attach model numbers or part numbers to each one. So they're great for like ordering repair parts or making catalogs of repair parts. And so they're also good for how do you put things back together. So you can use them to order and catalog parts, or you can also use them as instructions almost and show somebody where the pieces in an assembly go. That, remember, a picture is worth 1,000 words. So this diagram just by itself shows so much information of how all these parts stack up and what order they go together and where do they fit in relation to the other parts. So we're going to look at a basic example of this today, and we're going to make an exploded assembly view. So you can see lots of examples of these types of things. And what you'll notice on pretty much all of them is that the parts are always numbered, or at least on a good one. Okay, so this one has no numbers on it. Here's an example of one kind of like what we're going to make. You can see the different parts blown apart, and then it has numbers that go to them that correspond to a parts list. So that's kind of what we're looking for, is to get something like this when we're done. Okay, so let's jump back to Inventor. And the first thing we have to do is we have to take this assembly, and we're going to sort of pull it apart. But when you pull it apart, you want to think about how would it actually be disassembled. Don't just take the pieces and drag them wherever. You want to pull them apart in the assembly in the order that they're put together or taken apart, and you want to keep them kind of lined up so that if you took them and scrunched them back together, they would be assembled correctly. So we're going to use this trick called tweak components, and if you hit this, basically what you're going to do is you're going to go through piece by piece and pull these apart. Now this seems really backwards because you probably at this point have normally just made an assembly file that you worked really hard to put all these pieces together, and now it's like, well, why did I put them all together? And I'm just going to take them and blow them back apart. So one important thing to note here is that this presentation file is completely separate as far as the location of the parts. It's separate from your assembly file. So when I take these pieces and blow them apart in a presentation file, it does not affect your assembly file. That the presentation file comes after the assembly file in order of importance. So if I change my assembly model, that could impact the presentation file, but changing the presentation file will not impact the assembly model. So it's a one-way road, basically. So the important thing here is the assembly model. Anything you do to the presentation file is kind of after the fact. It won't mess up your assembly. So I'm going to go into the Tweak Components button, and let's start maybe with this pin and this clip in the back. So I'm going to choose these pieces, and if I zoom in here, I'm going to click one, hold Control and click the second one, and the goal is to kind of take these apart at the same time. So I'm going to use these arrows, and you can basically like drag these things back like that. Then the problem that a lot of people run into on this is they are, and I wish they'd fix this in Inventor because I don't think it's very intuitive. They go and they hit the green check mark because they think, okay, I moved those pieces, I'm done. They hit the green check mark and it takes you out of the tweak components command. So the trick here, when you hit this tweak components button, let me go back and do this again. The trick when you're done, so you don't have to go back and hit this button every single time, is hold Control and choose your pieces. Use the arrow to drag them wherever you want. And then I think the best thing to do is hold Control and then just deselect those pieces instead of hitting OK. So when you hit the OK button, that takes you completely out of the command. So what I'm going to do now is choose just the pin here and grab the arrow and drag it back. Oops, I didn't want that. You can also kind of free move these if you want. So you can play around with these different grips that are on these things. So let me go back here. So when you go to tweak components, you'll see when you click this thing, it gives you kind of a bunch of different options here. You can also change this, like what kind of movement is it going to do. So like for instance, instead of moving it, if I want to rotate it, I can choose that. And now maybe I want to have this piece where it, you know, rotates over a little bit or rotates this way. And really all you're thinking about is how do these things move. So maybe I want to rotate it that way, then go back to move and have it move back. Okay. So all you're really doing is you're trying to take these pieces and pull them apart. So let me go back here. On this piece, probably really what I would like to do, so I'm going to start from scratch here. Tweak components. I'm going to Control select both of these. Bring them over. Control click the pin to remove it. I'm going to drag this thing back. And I'm going to switch to rotate because it's kind of hard to see it. And I'm going to rotate it back just a couple of degrees so I can see it better. And then Control click that to deselect it. Okay. Now the trick here that you're going to run into is you want to keep these parts where you can see all of them. So the next problem I'm going to run into is I need to move this up without hitting this. Okay. So now I've got an issue because you can see if I bring it up, it's going to overlap these other pieces. So you want to kind of think ahead of time of what are these going to look like. Now I can go back and adjust these. So if I Control click these, I can take them both and like, you know, bring them back over here farther, which probably should have put them right there. But you're going to see why in doing these in steps, sometimes it makes your animation not that great. Now for this, the animation no one's ever going to see, so it doesn't matter. But I'm going to show you why if I don't get this right the first time, it kind of makes your animation a little bit lame. Okay, so I got those. Notice when I do this, I'm staying in the isometric view, because a lot of times what happens is people will, you know, move the parts in a view like that, and what looks good in this view does not really represent what's going to look good in your isometric view when you put this thing on paper. So what I try to tell people is it's okay to rotate around and move around in the presentation file, but you always want to go back to your isometric view by hitting the corner of the view cube, because that's what you're going to see on the paper. So when I look at this thing on paper on my drawing, it's going to look like this. So I want to check it in that orientation. That way I know if it looks good or if it doesn't look good. Okay, so lastly, if I rotate around, I've got a lock washer down here, and there's supposed to be a nut down there, but somehow it's gone missing in the file that I gave you guys. So we'll look at how do we fix that in a second. But I'm going to take this and just drag it down, go to my isometric view, and maybe adjust that a little bit. Really, I just want to get some separation between the pieces. So right there looks pretty good. I'm going to hit OK. And so that's kind of the beginnings of an exploded assembly. So kind of the neat thing here you can do now is when you get done, you can play these, and it'll take it back to the beginning and show you kind of what it looks like if the pieces were to explode apart. And you can see when I didn't get this right on the very first try, it makes your animation look a little bit disorganized, but you get the same effect at the end if you're just going for the view. Okay, so before we get any fancier with this, how do we take this and save it and put it onto a drawing page? So the trick is that you want to take this and they've got some new buttons in here, so I'm going to show you there's lots of different ways you can do this. I'll show you kind of the old way that I did it before they added these new features, and then we'll try some of these new features and see how they work. So the first thing, the way I used to do it is I hit capture camera, or sorry, not capture camera, snapshot view. So it'll show up over here when I hit new snapshot view. When I hit that, you can see it shows up as a view over here, so you can save that. And now when I save this, this is going to be a separate file, so this is my presentation file. You would put this in the same folder as all your part files, your assembly file, your drawing file, everything in the same folder by project always. So I'm going to go into my downloads folder, into that project folder, and I'm going to save this in there. So I'm going to say, let's call this tow hitch assembly lecture file. That way I don't overwrite the finished one that I gave you guys. So I'll save this. Save all the other files just in case. And so there's my finished version of this thing. Okay, so now you can go to New, go to IVTech and create your drawing page in inches. You can fill out the title block. I'm just going to leave it blank for right now. Now to make a view of that, my goal is to make a view of my assembly and my exploded assembly together on the same page. So I could go to Base, and I'm going to go up here and choose my files. So I'm going to hit that button, and the first thing that I'm going to do is create a view of my assembly file. So I'm going to choose the IAM and hit Open. And why is this mad? Oh, I think it's made in an old version. Hang on, I gotta open it up and save it here. I'm working in 2020 and I think you guys are in a different version than me, so it's mad about something in the assembly file, so let's just open it up and save it. So it's mad about this nut down here that's missing, so let's save this and see if it's happy. Let's go ahead and delete this off too. So let's delete the nut out and maybe just place a new one in there. So let's go to Content Center. We need a nut, a hex nut. Let's go to hex nut -inch, hit OK. We'll rotate around. Pick this thing. And drop it in there. I think, if I remember right, this thing is 5/8 of an inch. Yep. Okay, so we can right click, hit done. Now let's just constrain this thing really quickly. So let's just do an insert constraint. Good enough. We'll hit OK. We're not worried about compressing that lock washer as long as we can show that that's on there. So let's go back to our ISO view, save this thing. Let's go back to our presentation now because we've got some changes that are going to roll downhill, so we're going to deal with the parametric part of this really quickly. If I go to my presentation file, if I rotate this up, you can see that that hex nut is in there now, so I need to take that and go to Tweak Components, and we need to bring it down underneath the lock washer. So I'm going to bring it down to about there, just where you can see a little bit of space between them. Hit OK. Check it in your isometric view. Looks good. Let's save it. Let's make sure we save the assembly model. I think I did. Now let's go back to our drawing page and try and make that base view again. Now it's happy. Okay. So I'm going to rotate this around so it's the same orientation as my exploded view. I'm going to go, we'll try 1:2 scale. That's probably going to be too big, but we can come back and adjust it. So let's go 1:2. We'll hit OK. I do like to shade these usually, so I'm going to turn on the shaded button and hit OK. So there's my assembly view. Now I also want to add a presentation view that shows it all exploded apart. So I'm going to go to Base View. This time I'm going to hit the File folder button and choose my presentation file. Hit Open. And I'm going to drag it over here. You usually want the configuration of these or the orientation of them to match. So I'm going to try and do this at 1:2. It may not fit on here. Yeah, that's just not going to fit. So let's shrink all these down. Let's go maybe 1 to 1.5. Or sorry, other way, 2.5. Or maybe just 1 to 3. Let's try that. I like 2.5. I like to try and fill this up on the page. So let's go 1 to 2.5. Hit OK. Let's resize this one. Hit OK. I'm going to switch this one so it's shaded, so I'll double click it and shade it. Now you can see it's kind of cutting off the bottom of my view here. So let's see if we can adjust that. Let's hit I always forget how to adjust this. Let's go back and look at our presentation file. It looks like maybe it's not updating correctly. Oh, I know why. It has to do with the snapshot views. So I used to trim all the errors out of my videos and make it look like I was perfect at everything, and then I realized people learn more from my mistakes sometimes than me doing everything right all the time. So here's what happened. When I tried to go to my drawing, it's not putting the nut in the right place. Now you can see the lock washers down here too. What we need to do is do a new snapshot view, because the snapshot view that's on my drawing right now is an old one from before we fixed the nut and put it in there. So let's go back to our presentation file, and now that we have it the way that we want, we need to do that new snapshot view. So let's do a new snapshot. We have view 2. Let's save, go back to our drawing, and now I can double click this and say, instead of view 1 up here, let's delete this off. And when I make that base view of my presentation file, see how I can choose between my snapshots? And also our lock washer is not showing up for some reason, so we may need to look into that. There we go. So this is, well, we'll talk about this for a second, but the reason the lock washer is not showing up, you have to go to recovery options and include surface bodies, and we're going to talk in a second about why that is. In short, it's because of the file type, but if you're really curious, I'll show you the details of why you have to go in and turn that on. So let's go back, let's set this up again. We want to shade this, we want 1 to 2.5. Hit OK. That looks pretty good. The trails are kind of a point of argument for people sometimes. Some people like to see these trail lines on there, some people don't. I'll let you decide what you do or don't like. If you want to turn them off, you can double click your view, and if you go into the component, you can uncheck this thing that says show trails, and that will turn those lines off. So some people like them, some people don't. So to finish this drawing, and then we'll go back and talk about this lock washer in a second, we need to put a parts list on here. So we're going to go to the Annotate tab, and you guys will like this. This is super easy. We're going to go to Parts List, choose your exploded assembly view, just click on it, and then hit OK. Hit OK. And you can take your bill of materials and just drop it up there in the corner. Now it'll probably overlap a bunch of stuff. We can go back and fix that after the fact. So kind of drag things out of the way, but this one's like way too wide. So let's double click this now, and let's kind of fix this. So first of all, it's got this description column that I really don't need. So I'm going to hit this button that says column chooser, and I'm going to grab the description column and just move it out so I'm not using it. Hit OK. You can type other things in here if you want to, like on this one, instead of this, you know, weird model number from McMaster Car, we can just say this is the lock washer. And down here, instead of this, you know, call out, let's say this is just a 5/8-11 hex nut. So we can hit apply and OK. And now you can fit that stuff in there a little bit better. If you need to, you can also drag these columns to increase or decrease their size. Like this still is, you know, kind of big. Really doesn't need to be any bigger than that. So to finish our assembly drawing now, let's go to the balloon tool. This is my favorite part of this always. I don't know why. It's just kind of fun for me when I get to the very end. You've done all this work and you get to go through and number these parts. So we're going to put a note balloon on each one of these individual pieces that matches up to our parts list. So you hit the balloon tool on the annotate tab, and you're just going to go up and just click each piece. And the clicking here is a little bit tricky. You're going to click once to choose the piece, click again to set the balloon, then you're going to right click and go to continue. So left, left, right, continue. Okay, so let's do it again. Left, left, right, continue. Left, left, right, continue. Okay, so if you can get that clicking order down, putting these on is pretty easy. This is my favorite part of doing the assembly drawings though, is when you get done, you get to put the note numbers on everything. It's nice and organized, and the cool thing is you'll see Inventor knows which piece is which, and it automatically matches it up to your parts list. So if you have a parts list that has like 50 pieces in it, you don't have to go through and match them up. Inventor does it for you. So to finish this drawing, the only thing we need to do is go down and fill out the title block. So we're going to go to IVTech Landscape A, go to Field Text. So let's call this the drawing title. Let's just call it Tow Hitch. Make sure your title is all caps. J. Hamilton. I can put the date in there. We're not at any standard scale. This is a weird scale, so I'm just going to say not to scale, because 1 to 2.5 is not a standard scale. METC 107. Mechanical design and documentation. Hit OK. And there we go. There's our finished assembly drawing. Okay, so a couple things to finish up here. I just want to make sure I hit on all the points that you guys need to know. So that's how you make your assembly drawing for your final project. One thing people like to do sometimes is, if these drawings are too big or too complicated, these two views do not have to go on the same sheet. So sometimes you'll see where people will add a new sheet to their drawing, and you know, maybe sheet 1 is the assembly view and sheet 2 is the exploded view. You can, if those get too big or too complicated, you can put the assembled view and the exploded view on 2 separate pages. That's okay. Just make sure that if you do that, the parts list typically goes with the exploded view. Because if you look at your assembly view, there are pieces here that you can't see sometimes when it's all put together. Like for instance, the lock washer that's under there, you can't see it in this view even though we know it's there. Okay. So it's okay to do 2 pages for your project if you need to. One of the example projects that I showed you guys in the final project folder, the one for the bench vise, if you go down and look at that, the student that made that project did that exact trick. So we'll look at those really quickly here. And you can see on his, he had this big complicated assembly. And so trying to fit that all on 1 page just didn't work, right? So his first page is the assembly, and then his second page he has devoted just to the exploded view. So if you need to do that, or you think it just looks nicer, you are totally capable of doing that. There's no reason you can't. Just make sure the parts list goes with your exploded view. Okay. So let's talk really quickly now to finish up here about this lock washer. Why did that not show up when we were originally setting up this view and I had to go in and turn on this thing that says surface bodies, right? Because we know it's there, but why doesn't it show up? It's even in the parts list. So if we go back to our assembly file, I linked this in for McMaster Car, and you can see it's 92147A, whatever. In the folder that I gave you guys, it's an IGES file. Okay, now if you remember back, an IGES file is like one of those agnostic files that it doesn't go with any particular CAD program. It's just a generic 3D file format. So the better version of that now is probably to use a step file. That Inventor pulls that in as a surface model instead of a true solid body. So if you use a step file, you won't get that issue. I did this a long time ago, and I don't think McMaster Car had step files at that point. They just had IGES files, so I used what was available to me. But that's an example of where maybe an IGES file is not as good as a step file. So I always tell people when they go to McMaster Car and download hardware, always, if you're using Inventor, always grab a step file that it's easier because it's a true solid body. So if you use a step file on this project, Inventor will not bring it in as a surface, it'll bring it in as a solid body, which means when you get to this step, it's going to automatically be there, and you don't have to go in and do this recovery thing and turn on surface models. Okay, so you can still do it. You know, IGES files will still work, but you got to be a little more savvy at bringing them in and manipulating them to get them to do what you want. Okay, so just to make sure I told you guys everything I need to here, let me check my lecture notes really quickly. One thing I can think of right now that I wanted to show you that I didn't. There is an automatic option in here when you do your presentations. When you go into tweak components, they used to have an automatic option in here, which looks like maybe they got rid of, which is good because it was awful. They used to have an option where you could like auto explode all the components, and it really didn't ever work. So it looks like maybe they got rid of that. One thing they have done that's new is this create drawing view. So when I'm in my presentation file, if I hit that create drawing view, notice it brings you right into here. And it automatically, you know, links in the model. So I don't know that this saves you a whole lot of steps, because we know that if we're in our regular drawing file, all you really have to do is hit that button for a base view and choose your model right here. So I guess it's a little bit quicker if you're already in the presentation file and you want to jump right to a drawing page, you can hit that button. But there's nothing magical about this button. You can do it manually right through your drawing file anyway. So, you know, it's kind of up to you what you want to do. But you can use that also. You can also save out the actual animations, which I didn't show you. If you want to, you can hit this video button and publish this out. And it will actually publish this out as a video file. Like if you wanted to post it on a website or email it to somebody so they can see this thing in action, how it would, you know, go together or come apart. You can actually, you know, record the timeline of these pieces moving if you want to. So that's kind of interesting, although maybe not terribly useful. So don't use hidden lines. I didn't really mention that. When you set up your drawing views for these things on drawing pages, this is kind of different. Don't use hidden lines on these. Okay, you don't want to do that. The other thing I see people do all the time, and I want to mention this, when you set up a drawing view for an assembly model, please don't do this. I probably should have mentioned this earlier. Hopefully everyone's still watching this video. Please, please, please don't do this. This seems like what you should do, right? Because this is what I taught you to do for individual parts. But I get people that do this all the time for the assembly models. This trick of orthographic drawings is only used for individual parts. Don't do it for an assembly model like this, because it's really kind of useless. Assembly views are just to visualize the object, so this does not do anyone any good. Also, you typically don't dimension assembly drawings. Don't do this, okay? All you really want to see for the assembly is visually what it looks like. If you need to see detailed information on individual parts, you would go to the part drawings that come after that. Okay, so please, please, please don't make front, right, top, and isometric drawing views on one page for an assembly model. This is not the setup for an assembly. This is the setup for a part drawing. Assembly drawings should be set up all the time like that. Don't do hidden lines on your views either. They don't really add anything. They just serve to further complicate your model. Okay, I think that pretty much covers it. So just kind of wrapping up some final thoughts here. What you guys are going to do for your final project now is basically use everything you know to reverse engineer whatever item you've come up with. So at this point, you know how to make an assembly model and a view of it on a drawing page. We just looked at how to make an exploded view, which you probably have figured out is not super difficult at this point. It's just kind of the artistic process of using the tweak components tool to pull this stuff apart. So at this point, you know how to make an exploded assembly view with a bill of materials and numbered notes. And after that, you guys know how to make drawing pages for all your individual parts. So you know everything you need to now to do this final project. It's down to you to just put in the time and come up with an idea of what you want to make. So remember to go back, and if you hit the modules button, your homework for this week is to start working on that final project. Go down, if you need to, again, kind of refresh your memory, watch part of this video, you know, individual sections, or read through the instructions again. And if you haven't already, try and get yourself a digital or dial caliper. They're very, very useful. So I'll cut this video there. Spend some time on your final project this week. If you have questions, you can send me an email, jhamilton83@ivytech.edu. So good luck, and I'll see you in the next video.